In my previous videos on this subject, I put forth the hypothesis that since, say, about 1700, Europeans have come to dominate the world because of various environmental factors. One of them being that the Indo-Europeans were originally a people of the steppe, the great vast plains of southern Russia, and the western branch moved into Europe, which had such a crazy quilt of geography and ethnic mixture of Indo-Europeans and a few others, that conflict was pretty much inevitable, and the warlike tendencies that they had developed on the steppe never really had a mitigating factor of prolonged peace to keep the Europeans from fighting each other, and thus having a powerful inducement to continue to advance their technology, which had the side effect of enabling them then to pretty much dominate the world. Their rivalries with each other made them strong enough to pretty much create today's hegemony of the West over the rest of the world. Now, this video is actually going to be dealing with the exceptions to that rule. Not all fabulous military technology originated in Europe. One enormous difference is in the Mongols, or the Turks, the various Turkic peoples of Central Asia and what is now Turkey, actually. These people developed organization and military science, technical science of the military, to an extent that created a type of warfare that no one in the West could withstand until the advent of gunpowder. They relied most heavily upon the mounted archer. They had infantry, of course, vast hordes of infantry, but the most important arm of their military was the mounted archer, using what is called the Tartar bow. The Tartar bow was an incredible piece of military technology, probably invented by some group of Turks. It's unclear who actually invented it. It's also called the composite bow. It's a combination of hide and horn and specific types of wood and sinew to make a bow that is extremely difficult to draw, but would release arrows with unbelievable, deadly, and accurate force. And when you put a natural horseman who has been born to horsemanship and born to the use of the Tartar bow, you had to pretty much be born to the use of the Tartar bow. It was a very, very difficult weapon to learn how to use proficiently. You couldn't just hand an infantryman one of these things and say, you know, go at the enemy. You had to, it took you almost a lifetime to master something like the English longbow. They'd go after an enemy formation or a group of enemy cavalry and stay out of the range of this enemy's swords and lances and this sort of thing, and shower them with arrows from these Tartar bows, arrows that could conceivably pierce the other guy's armor, maybe not his shield, but his armor. And as long as you had lots and lots and lots of arrows, it didn't really matter how big of a force you were up against. You could make mincemeat out of him, because you just had to get out of range of his handheld weapons and shower him with arrows, and then once he broke, you sent your infantry in. And that was the end of him. And that's what the Mongols and the various Turkish peoples of the steppes, also the Magyars, what became the Hungarians, they did that as well. And they created vast empires of their own, but in certain ways, this success is actually a success or an exception that proves the rule. These peoples conquered large swaths of land, and their very successes made them soft. They didn't have any opponents anymore. They essentially defeated everybody. Or, as in the case of the Mongols, they were eventually brought low by other Mongols or other peoples of the steppes, i.e. The Mongols were eventually checked at Ain Jalut in modern Palestine by the Mamluks, who were Turkic warrior slaves, actually, that were recruited in the steppe and used the composite bow and fought as mounted archers as well. But they were Muslims, and they were fighting to protect Islamic civilization from the Mongols. Another example which has to be mentioned is the Japanese. The Japanese had enormous military success in the late 19th and the first half of the 20th century. But again, this proves the rule. Had they fought in their traditional way, they might have been fantastic warriors and certainly not corrupt or decadent or soft. but their technology simply wasn't up to scratch. They learned how to use firearms from the Europeans around 1600 or something like that. Then later on they threw all the Europeans out, and when the Europeans returned, or the Americans actually in 1853, they found the Japanese using the same arquebus weapons that they had, I think it was the Portuguese or the Dutch had left behind with them 300 years later, whereas American and European military technology had advanced exponentially. But then, of course, the Japanese immediately took on the organization and the technical aspects of European armies and fought as European armies against the Europeans, and with enormous success, and it took a lot to finally defeat them. So those are two examples of non-Indo-Europeans that were quite successful in fighting and in military technology. But again, the very fact that they didn't have the same conditions governing their civilization meant that their advancement either came rapidly and then was fizzled, or it was very short-lived, because the Turks became the Ottomans, who became notoriously corrupt and decadent because they had nobody else to fight, and the Mongols were crushed by a civil war, and eventually by Mongols who became the ruling class of China and became more Chinese than the Mongols and used the Mongol tactics against them. Or, as in the case of the Mongols, they became the rulers of India and fell prey to the well-known pleasures of life of the upper class in India, the legendary pleasures of upper-class India. So they didn't have the lean and mean motivation to stay on top, because they defeated everyone, because the geography of the places they were fighting for took them out of the steppes into these settled places where they became absolute masters and became corrupt, or eventually were defeated by other people who fought the same way. It is the exception, if you ask me, that proves the rule, but it is an interesting comment on technology. The Europeans didn't always have their own way, and they certainly didn't always have the best military technology. I'm not implying that at all. Thank you.